let's just start. Let's go straight for this. I'm always talking about thumbnail sketches. Okay, this is your guide before you pick up the paintbrush. All I've done here is, if you look at the photo reference, I squint my eyes and I look at the darks and lights. I'm not concerned about mid-tones or any other tones. All I'm concerning myself with is the darkest areas and the lightest areas. So effectively, I don't always make 3 thumbnail sketches. I usually just rely on one. But effectively, that's what I've got, this one here. Okay, that's a copy of my photo in terms of tonal shape, tonal composition. And composition, of course, meaning the placement of the different shapes within this, this rectangle. I could turn it into a linear outline, a contour line drawing, which would be this version here. So you can see the shapes and how they're broken up again on that plane. What I've done here is a negative. So all the light areas become dark and the dark areas become light. Why do I do this? All these little exercises help educate your eye and your mind's eye as to how to read your image. Okay, and it's so important to see the scene in this fashion rather than what perhaps we might have done prior in earlier times, is to say, well, oh look, there's people there, they seem to be sat at tables, they're having picnics, there's a building. That should not be your first concern. Okay, and again, this has popped up over the years quite regularly. I see a lot of people, and I'm sure I did this myself when I started out. I see people starting in the wrong place before they've picked up the brush. They think about the detail before. In other words, they're looking for the finish line before they've even taken their first step. Okay, that's a big mistake. Big mistake. We must forget the finish line, and I'm referring to the finish line by the details, the people, the figures sat at tables. That's what I call the finish line. Okay, so instead, let's get ourselves started off on the correct foot. Okay, and that's to see the image as a whole. Now, once we've discovered this, okay, this tonal composition, it doesn't necessarily mean to say you have to copy it. Okay, this, going back to where we started our conversation when we opened the doors, this is probably where your opportunity to self-express starts. You don't have to go mad. You don't have to suddenly become the best artist on the planet, best painter on the planet. All I would ask of you, to ask yourselves, is to say, why don't we just first steps into self-expression, why don't we just move or change one aspect from the reference, source reference? Why don't we I do it all the time. I do this all the time. You'll see me do it today. I might consider something like, well, I won't go too mad. What I'll do is I'll perhaps bring the building out that's hiding under the trees, in the shadow of the trees, a little bit more. I've noticed, I think it's a little cafe, and I've noticed there are, in the photo, I've noticed there are advertising standards, flags, whatever you want to call them, excuse me, poking out from the front of the building. Now, there's more, there's windows, there's doorways, etc., etc. This is, again, your opportunity to leave things out or embellish upon something that's not, that you feel could do, that could bring more interest to the painting. I suppose what I'm saying is this: with every time we refer to our reference image, photo, let's call it, there are decisions to be made. What we leave out and what we keep in. And don't dismiss that as I know all about that, but, show me how to paint the painting. Don't dismiss it, because that's where, as I said, that's where self-expression starts. It's I'm tempted today, even before I've started painting, I'm tempted probably to put a standing figure, at least one standing figure in this painting. Everybody's a little bit too far off, but again, that is nearer the finish line. So let's get something started here. I will keep my sketch pretty basic, and I will think about these big shapes. And if I need to, and if you need to, you can look at your tonal sketch, your tonal thumbnail, and say, well, there's a very dynamic shape up here in this area of trees. As I've sort of titled or subtitled, this is a case of showing off bright sunshine. So you need to know where that's going to sit in the mix, in the composition. And it's in here, something like this. Lovely hit of bright sunshine on that lawn area. It's quite nice, this foreground, because it's what I call a sort of tonal sandwich. You've got this lovely limey yellow green sunlit area back here. Then it's sandwiched with a nice complementary shadow color here, something like this. And interestingly enough, you see that shadow tone. If you think of that shadow as a tone, when you squint your eyes, a tonal shape, you'll see that it moves into the part of the building, into the cafe. So it all becomes almost a connected shape. And the other side of the sandwich is sunlight in the immediate foreground with a bit of dappled shadow here in this sort of area here. Now, I still, despite recording it this way, doesn't mean to say that it has to be painted exactly like this. Keep your options open for as long as possible. But if you start by recording what is actually in the reference photo, then you can play around with it. So the cafe roof is something like this. Can't see an angle on the cafe roof. There might be one here, about there. But there's certainly, as I mentioned earlier, there's certainly these sort of advertising flags, probably for coffees or ice creams, that type of thing. They look like little sort of flags in a foreshortened fashion. So you don't see them side on like my hand. You see them like that, poking out of the wall of the cafe towards you. So that dark shape is there. It's sort of here. And then there's a back area of dark shapes, something like this. There's a glimmer of light around here, in that area here. And then there's what I call a nonsense area through here at the back of the sunlit lawn back there. There's what I call a nonsense area, an area where we really shouldn't concern ourselves with. We shouldn't be scrutinizing it and thinking, what do I do with that? That'll paint itself. There are areas in the background that will paint themselves. Excuse me. So now then, I'm going to do what I don't advise you all to do. I'm going to pencil this in much harder so you can see what I've done. I certainly don't recommend this. I wouldn't be doing this unless I was doing a demonstration. So I'm looking at shapes that I want to keep. There's a shape in here like this. That'll be light. Put a little L shape there. There's a nice little patch of light between two tree trunks. Put imagine a little L for light there, little L letter. Another little shape here. They become very abstract shapes. This is sort of self-expression. I'm seeing it how I want to see it, but it's based on the facts. It's based on what's really in the reference material. but only loosely based on it. So I'm seeing very abstract ragged edge, a light shape here, you know, there, dark, and so then we've got this amazing, I'm going to put a hard pencil line here, got this amazing lime green lawn area here, and that's the brightest, probably the brightest area in the entire painting. So that and the immediate foreground. So there we are. I hope that sort of spells it out a bit better for you folks and makes more sense of what I've just explained. A little lozenge shape there of light. And as I say, by going quite heavy with the pencil work, it really, I hope, highlights the way I'm seeing my composition, my design. Design becomes the most, in the early days, I never appreciated just how important design was and making sure you had a good, strong design before you started painting. But the more you develop, the more important you get to realize that design and composition is essential. Okay, so, you know, it is a sketch. It's not a drawing. You know, drawings are something quite different. This is just something to hang your painting on. Okay. Right, let's move on to getting some paint moving here. I'm starting with on the list, as usual, I say a mop brush or a large round brush. I have both as options here. I prefer to work with a mop brush as it holds a lot more paint and a lot more water. So have you noticed, sorry, something else I should bring out. Have you noticed I've not even hinted upon any detail at all, other than, I suppose, things I want to remind myself of, these sort of hints of shapes in the cafe. Haven't put my figures in. They can go in because they're so small in the mix. But because even though they're small, when we do get to the finish line and those details do need to go in, they're going to stand out because they're going to be dark against light. Okay, but I don't see the need of drawing them in at this stage. So I'm just going to start off back here with a little bit of cerulean blue. Oops, bit of cerulean blue, very weak. I'll show you what I'm doing here. I mean, it's so weak, it barely registers. And notice that I'm applying it from the belly of the brush. It's just look at the movement of the hand with the brush. I'm certainly not holding the brush like a pen. It's just almost as though it's almost as though I'm just moving it from having left the brush rest on the surface of the paper. So there's probably a little bit of ultramarine blue in this as well. Doesn't really matter. It's blue. It's in the right place. It's weak. It's not overpowering. Now, into the background. You know this area I mentioned earlier about it'll paint itself. This is sort of what I mean here. There's a lot of water in this brush. A heck of a lot of water in this brush. I'm just going around, for now I'm going around the cafe shape. I know it's around here somewhere, but I'm staying out of most of that cafe area until I get some warmer colors going. So this area that we say is going to paint itself, what I mean by that is, yes, I'm going to put paint in here and I'm going to change the color, I'm going to change the tone. I'm going to infer that there are trees back there. But I'm certainly not studying my photo to know what type of trees they are, how many trees there are. I'm more concerned about there's a slight darker area say there, right up against the whoops, I don't want to slip of the hand there. I want to keep that area nice and white at the moment. This is all still white paper. Sorry, yeah, so I'm just going a little bit darker back here in the background. So by applying paint this way, it will, as I say, paint itself. Now there's sunlight hitting back there too somewhere. So why don't we pick up a little bit of cadmium yellow? Not too strong. Cadmium yellow is quite a powerful color, so be quite mean with it. That cadmium yellow, of course, will end up probably in this area too, back here. So if I'm thinking ahead, this area here needs to be slightly darker than the sunlit lawn. Okay. So given that the sunlight lawn is one of the brightest things, if not the brightest thing in the entire image, then I can probably afford to go a little bit darker still behind it. So why don't we pick up a little bit of raw sienna, which will warm things up a little bit, and a little bit of a little bit of ultramarine blue. And that will just keep a fairly neutral green. But what it's really doing, of course, is it's darkening the area down a little bit. And it seems to be at its darkest along that back horizontal line there where I'm doing now. I'm painting now. So, of course, I know what it is that I am. I know what's really there in the background. It's just a variety of tree shapes. Same again, raw sienna, ultramarine blue, a little bit stronger each time until I'm happy that I've got something close to the correct tonal value, temperature. We know that there is some sunshine back there. So a little bit of cadmium yellow on its own. I'll find a nice little area of clean palette there, just there. So that now this is now representing a little bit of sunshine back there. Now this is probably still damp. My sky is probably still damp. So what I could do, so as not to fill this area in with anything too strong, I can just tap some of this sunshine into the sky area because there are branches growing in front of it. And how easy is that? You know, you're not going in and saying, well, I better put those branches and those trees in because there's trees up against that sky. If you want to do that later, you can. But you know, this is what's meant by, you know, if you let watercolor educate you rather than try bullying the medium by sort of saying, well, I better make sure that there's a tree branch here. I better make sure there are leaves and tree trunks by here. That's what I refer to by when I sort of say, you know, bullying. You're over controlling. If you just let watercolor educate you, if you just sort of put something up here very loosely, tapping it in like I have there, and just sit and watch it for a couple of seconds, it's going to probably do something far more sophisticated looking than you possibly could have done by forcing out the shapes with the point of a brush. So, and then, you know, you decide once it's revealed what it's doing and where it's settling, then you go in perhaps with a little more finesse, something a little bit closer to the point of the brush. So squinting my eyes, as you can't see me doing, but that's what I'm doing here. I'm sort of leaning back, squinting my eyes, and it's pretty clear that at the moment my tonal values are nowhere near. Just grab the photo. My tonal values in this area, this is the area I'm painting at the moment. It's like a big caterpillar shape back there. And my tonal values are nowhere near those of the photograph. So, so why don't we get them a little bit closer? We go back into our, this time more paint, less water, back into the ultramarine blue. Let's take a bit of burnt sienna this time, not raw sienna, because of course you've only got to look at the two siennas, the burnt sienna and the raw sienna. You can see that the burnt sienna is a darker color. So it makes sense, if you want a darker color, to choose the darker of the two to create that darker mix. There, look at that. It's got a lot of blue in it, not enough burnt sienna. I can tell that by the fact that that dark is a very slaty grey bluey color. So let's pick up a little bit more burnt sienna. I'm only doing this now because it's still wet. Had I have taken longer to paint this, I probably wouldn't be able to do this now because it would be dry. That's why certain passages in every painting will require speed, quick decisions, and speed. So going back to what we were talking earlier, you develop that by painting a lot. You don't fear it anymore. You just know that that's what's going to happen. If I paint quickly and I can increase the paint ratio over water, this is what I'm going to get. But no copying of a photo will teach you that. Only painting. And if it's a lack of reference material that's holding you back from doing that, then make it up. Invent a simple little landscape scene that'll allow you to learn these things. So there we are. Now then, I'm going to probably put a little sort of a little more raw, cadmium yellow back in places here. So starting to get there now. It's starting to get somewhere near where I want it. So color intensity, there's color intensity is something different, of course, to tonal balance, tonal variation. Color intensity or chroma or color saturation is all about the amount of pigment you're using, as opposed to how much water you're putting in the mix. Okay, let's let that settle for a moment and start looking at, I think if I'm really careful, it might be better thinking about it if I speed dry this now. What I was going to say was, if I'm really careful, I'd be able to put this really pale lawn color in here on this horizontal. But I'm pretty certain if I've only got to make the smallest amount of contact with that edge with the brush, and I'm going to lose my lovely bright lawn. So I'm going to speed dry what I've just painted. I think that will be sufficient. Why don't I use a clean brush rather than clean that one out, because that takes time. So I'm just picking up my round brush here, and I'm picking up the cadmium yellow, but to make sure it's bright and sort of cool, I'm picking up a little bit of my viridian green or phthalo green, whichever one you've got. Let's try this for a moment. Okay, it's the right tonal balance. It probably does need a little bit more of the cadmium yellow in it for a brighter mix. And if you, what I'm doing is I'm staying, it's a bit like painting water. I'm staying off the back edge. I'm leaving a little white fillet of paper right at the back edge of the lawn back there. And that's simply because as this color goes back into the landscape, gets further away from us, that's the palest area. That's the weakest, lightest tonal value of all of it. And as we move somewhere down into lower middle, about there, we can just warm it up a little bit or strengthen it a little bit about there. And it's interesting because you see, even relatively unimportant areas of your painting require that sensitivity of knowing that, you know, there's an exchange of color intensity, even in the lightest of areas of your painting. And that goes, of course, for dark areas too. Darks shouldn't just be flat darks. They should have changes in intensity. They should vary. It should overall be a dark shape or a light shape, but there should be tonal variations. But that's where you'd find it. The back, the furthest part of that lawn is going to be your palest area. But as the lawn moves towards the people sat down having their picnics, it just gets a little brighter. There's a little bit more use of the cadmium yellow. Now we've got the immediate foreground, of course, which is about here. Now that's got more cadmium yellow in it. And I'm not too careful as to whether I go over what will be my shadowed area here. In fact, it's quite a good idea just to go into it a little bit. It'll give depth to that area. So that's just cadmium yellow very quickly. Look how quickly that's applied. Okay. Seems to creep. This color seems to creep. If you look at your, you know, if you are looking for clues and ideas from your photo, I quite like this one that it's given me, and that's that this color creeps around here in places. So even back there seems to be a blast of sunlight somewhere around there. It's quite intense about here on the ground. Now you can use a little bit of raw sienna in the immediate foreground, because that just warms things up again a little bit more. So, you know, a mini lesson within a lesson here. Your colors need to be controlled in terms of temperature changes. I'm not going from cold to warm in this foreground. I'm just going a little bit warmer in a brightly lit area. Okay, I've got cauliflowers occurring here, you know, runbacks, whatever you want to call them. Quite like that. I think they'll work okay there. In fact, I'm more than happy to encourage more. So if I pick up, let me just show you. If I pick up plenty of water in this brush and a fair bit of paint, and I just deliver a couple more of these yellow shapes, then they probably will also develop into cauliflowers. Because, of course, what I've done is, whereas I dried this area out here, I wasn't too careful to dry this area out. So I'm putting quite wet paint into an area that's still damp, and that's where your cauliflowers will occur. Right, cauliflowers will not happen if you're putting wet on dry, okay? They only occur when you're putting wet on damp. Right. Okay, there's also some now I'm getting my eye in now, as they say. It's funny, and it can happen this way. You paint and for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes longer into your painting before you start seeing the painting the way you want to see it. And I'm very careful with those words. It's starting, it's at this very point now that the painting is starting to become my painting, and I'm making the departure from my photograph, okay? Because at some point when using photographic reference, you have to sometimes forcibly make that departure from your reference image. Otherwise, of course, the obvious happens. It becomes a copy of your photograph. And if that's what you want, that's absolutely fine, of course. But if you want to develop those skills towards self-expression, then you really must sort of take those stabilizers off the bicycle at some point. So, right, I've just spattered a few sort of, I'm looking at, there's a huge hogweed, or I always forget the name of this wildflower. But it's got interesting shapes down here in the left-hand corner. So I'm just tapping in and dotting in a couple of those suggested shapes. So I feel as though this is a sort of stage. I've reached a stage here by where, I've either got to let things dry, or I simply need to give my brain a rest. I need to give my eyes a rest and reevaluate. So, and that's good. So if you were to sort of analyze the process, what you'll see is areas of rapid painting, areas of quick decision making, rapid painting, followed by or interspersed with these moments where you just think, right, I can afford to take my foot off the accelerator here. I need to take stock of things and decide on the next move. The more you paint, this schedule of the process becomes more familiar to you, and the more familiar it gets, the more confident you get, and the less frantic it feels, if you like. Okay. And I've got some tips. I'm nearly completing a little ebook that will be on my website soon for free download. And I've got some really, I think, useful tips in that sense for how to focus and plan your time, what little time you have, how best to make use of it. I'll let you know when it's uploaded, probably within the next 5 days or so.
Okay, folks, that brings us to the end of part 1. Part 2 you will be able to see next week. It will be uploaded to YouTube in a week's time from today. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please be sure to tune in for the next session, part 2. And if you like what you've already seen, please remember to subscribe and hit the like button, and of course hit the bell icon if you want notification of that new release as and when it's uploaded. You get immediate notification as to when part 2 will be uploaded. So thanks for your company. Hope to see you in the next one.